practice across the industry and also our members' expertise. So it should be an informal conversation today. We hope to help you understand many issues that you're facing with the COVID pandemic. We've also invited today some experts on pest control who are going to help manage any questions on those topics. So on the call today, we've got, sorry, bear with me just a second. Sorry, my computer decided that moment to freeze, playing an April Fool's joke on me. So on the call today, you've got myself, SOFHT chairman. I also work for Tesco, looking after food safety policy, amongst other things. We've also got Peter Littleton, who's our SOFHT vice chair and also technical director at Christine's Food Hygiene. And we have Ian Booth, who is going to chair the Q&A today. He is SOFHT Company Secretary and Global Vice President of Food Safety and Quality at Martin Brewer. And we also want to extend a welcome and a thanks to our members. So John Simmons from Ashita, Brian Duffin from Rokill and Alex Wade from Pelgar. These guys are pest control companies and they're here to take your questions. So I'm going to hand you over now to Ian, who will explain how the Q&A should work. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiona. Can you hear me okay?
I can, yes.
Yeah, great, okay. Do feel free to share your screens and your faces if you wish. It makes it a little bit more personable, but it's entirely up to you. As Fiona said, these are very informal, and it's an opportunity to ask questions. On the call, everybody is an expert in a certain area, and it's great that we've got such a diverse number of people on the call. And what happened last week was we had some questions related to pest control, so we were able to approach some of the members in that area and answer some of the questions today. As well as pest control, so we've got an hour together, and to manage the time to get the most we can out of the meeting. So the suggestion was we go through the pest control and then offer the opportunity for any other areas that people would like to talk about. So last week we talked around social or physical distancing, the new normal, and what will be the future of the new normal. COVID decontamination was one that came up. Just before we start, and it's going to be quite a challenge for quite a few people on the call, and ideally we want to do this as a conversation rather than through chats, but we might need to use chats. Are there any other areas that at the moment people are particularly keen to hear about or get some further understanding about before we start into pest control?
Ian, it's Diane here.
Hi, Diane.
Hi, morning. Or no, it's afternoon now, isn't it? I've heard about enforcement, not just enforcement from enforcement officers, but from the police, etc., going into facilities and factories, looking at social distancing. If we get an opportunity, could we just catch up with any manufacturers about any issues or difficulties they're experiencing carrying on operating whilst their workforce have got concerns about that? Okay,
thank you. So we can cover that, or ask, maybe people can have a think now if anybody has some experience in that. And any other areas people will be keen to talk about or share best practice on? Well, what I suggest then is let's start the discussion on pest control. We've got a couple of other areas that people are interested in. Hopefully then that will sort of get some conversation going. If need be, we can ask people then to add in on chat. So maybe if we can start with pest control. Hello, Brian. I can see you. I can see John there. I think, hello. Alex, you're probably somewhere in the queue. Hi there. Hi. So we had a couple of questions last week related to mothballing of sites, how you'd manage a pest control contract during that time, risk assessing around what pest control is required, physical distancing, bringing pest control onto site, and then sort of starting to get a business ready for opening again. So maybe just to start, maybe from your side, Brian, and then bring in John and Alex from a mothballing expectation. So for people who are not aware, this is where a facility is currently closed during the period to be reopened again. What type of service would you expect a business to continue with around that mothballing time?
Well, certainly when you've gone in, unfortunately, we've been lucky that there's not been a load of contracts that we've had to go to where we've mothballed, but where we have come across it, and they've been really associated with the restaurant industry, supplying food product to those. We found that obviously your pests don't know that COVID-19's happening to the business, so they're still very keen to get inside the building to spread their kind of joy into the food industry. And what we don't want to do is, when we do actually start up a business again, is to start up with pests, which obviously slow down the production of food. So I think it's really, really important to ensure that you do have some sort of pest control on site. It might be that it has to be a reduced capacity, because obviously people might not be on site all the time, but normally there's going to be some engineer in there at least once a week, and which can tie in treatments or visits and proactive measures in between time. And I think that's really, really important, because your risk to the building hasn't changed. All right, you're not producing, but there might still be product on site that's stored.
Thank you, Ryan. John, any further thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the two keywords, and they are words that are used an awful lot, and sometimes people don't really get their head around what they actually mean. The two keywords are risk assessment, and it doesn't really matter if it's a whole plant, a restaurant or a retail facility, or a food manufacturing factory, or a production line within that factory that is being mothballed. This concept of risk assessment is key, because things change in these sort of situations, and it might be that the changes might allow a reduced level of input from the pest control contractor, or they might indeed require an increased input, because we're seeing all sorts of changes going on in factories. Certainly we work primarily with food factories, and we're seeing all sorts of changes going on within those factories. You've got personnel changes, you've got office areas that are quiet or deserted, you've got personnel changes in production areas, maybe reduced numbers or maybe increased numbers, and some of those increased numbers might be agency workers. You've got, if production's being ramped up, then you've got increased levels of raw materials being held. You might have increased levels of finished products being held on site. You might have disruption to waste handling procedures. All of these things can impact on pest control. One thing that's really that's brought this home to me in the past couple of weeks is that we've got a couple of remote monitoring systems installed in sites, and just the past few days, one site in particular, the level of mouse activity has gone through the roof. And this is on a site with that has not got many people wandering around in it at the moment. So these things do need to be considered. Yeah,
that's very, very interesting you say about the remote systems. That's something that we're finding as well.
Yeah. And if you don't want people wandering around your site, if you don't want pest controllers coming into your site every couple of days to do follow-ups and routines and the like, then maybe these sort of systems offer an opportunity. It's probably not the right time just now to be talking about installing them, but they have mileage.
Just explain, John, a little bit more around what they are.
Well, I mean, there's numerous different systems on the market. We've gone down the route of offering a particular system. It's called Green Trap Online. It's a Danish-based system, but essentially it relies on little PIR detectors, passive infrared detectors, to detect rodent movement. So it needs a warm-blooded creature to to trigger the alert. And they tell you where mice are, and these systems could be integrated with control-based systems as well. So with trapping or indeed with baiting, So they reduce, they certainly don't eliminate, but they reduce the need for human input in determining where rodents are active.
We tend to use a product called Signal. I agree, there's plenty out there, and we found this one particularly good because it generally works as an ordinary trap that you can fit into ordinary boxes, as you would normally when you're doing your normal inspections. But it is fantastic for putting in on ledges in places that are out of reach, places that are particularly difficult to get to for a technician, maybe for health and safety reasons, maybe as in now a mothballing reason. So yeah, fantastic things, and they've come about just at the right time, I think.
And I've seen just a comment come through on chat. Mike, thank you for that. Regarding so one issue I think we need consideration is conversion of non-toxic bait monitoring to toxic bait inside when production has ceased. This wouldn't necessarily be externally unless rats present a problem. This might necessitate that visits are maintained on the perimeters where there is little personal risk to the operative. So, any thoughts around that area?
Certainly. Oh, sorry. There is precedence for long-term baiting, not necessarily permanent baiting, especially where mice are involved, and using a long-term bait, as long as it's approved by the label, can be achieved in areas where you're not expecting there to be people. Originally, I think the legislation specifically mentioned homes and houses that were between tenants or offices that were between tenants, but I think in the current circumstances that could probably be interpreted to be factory units or warehouse units that had shut down shop for the time being. Would be my thoughts on that.
Thank you, Alex.
I think one of the things you need to bear in mind as well is what the specification says for that site. Now, there's an argument for talking with your suppliers, etc., and agreeing to go off spec. Basically, you need their agreement, obviously. But there are some sites that will say you're definitely not allowed to use rodenticide within a certain area. AIB is one of those that springs to mind, unless you have an ongoing issue. So I think it's worth approaching them just to say, look, things have changed. Obviously, they're not silly; they're aware things have changed. But just keep that communication and document what it is that you're doing and why you're doing it. John was saying about risk assessment. Now, yeah, that's one of the things that you definitely have to go back to and document, because when all this is blown over, people are going to be going in and auditing things and basically saying, why have you done that? Why have you done this? And as long as you've got that audit trail there, I can't see it there being an issue.
Yeah, from my point of view, I think the indoor-outdoor issue is key. Outdoors, there shouldn't really be much need to change what you would normally do, in my opinion, because it should be eminently possible for a pest controller to attend the externals of a site on a regular basis and carry out the service with all the appropriate social distancing that is needed. And the law regarding the regulations regarding the use, certainly of rodenticides outdoors, are very clear and pretty strict. And I think it would be a brave person who contravened any label requirements at the moment, purely on the basis of COVID-19 issues. I really can't see the need for that to happen. Indoors, you're probably talking to somebody here who is the world's one of the world's leading negatives about non-toxic monitoring blocks. I've never really understood the value and the point of them. Why put down a food source for a rodent when you're aiming to monitor that rodent? My immediate reaction at this point is that definitely if a plant is being mothballed, then there should be a switch made from non-toxic to toxic during that time, on the basis of risk assessment, documenting it appropriately. But I can't see any reason why that shouldn't happen. If it's a plant that's in operation, then if you are monitoring with non-tox blocks, then probably again risk assess it. But it might well be appropriate to continue using that same technique. I would probably argue that there's a case for introducing a trap-in-based system while current issues persist. So certainly if the frequency of routine inspection or definitely if the frequency of follow-up inspection is being reduced, then switch to a trap-in-based regime.
And we've got a couple of questions coming through on chat, so trying to keep up with those while we're talking. You may be able to see these, but just try and summarise some of these. Related to I guess, new pests or not expected. So we have goats in Wales, I think, came up. Foxes on the high street. More prevalence of pigeons getting into facilities. And Mike, I know you've also brought a question. Maybe you can talk it through in a minute when we've just answered some of the others, if that's okay. So let's just cover the new types of pests that we may be seeing. Maybe we can cover that, and then go to Mike. Is it Mike Ayres that sent a note? So new pests. Any thoughts?
I can't see that this particular issue is going to generate issues with new pests. I think it's probably more likely to generate more issues with existing ones.
Yeah, I'd agree, definitely. If we're seeing out on the street perhaps as well, where we're having maybe reduced services. I know one of my colleagues, he actually said, "Oh, I remember 1974 with the strikes, and when they moved all the sacks, all these rats were running around all over the place." So that's quite possible, but I think part of your mothballing should be that you're going round the factory, the food manufacturing premises, and basically making sure that you've done absolutely everything you can to prevent anything from coming in. So
I would add to that as well, saying that a reduced number of people on sites is going to, it's not going to increase the likelihood that animals are breaking in and creating new infestations, but it will increase the danger and the risk that they will be unnoticed for longer. And so when access to sites is achieved, there needs to be a more diligent check for new emergents, new infestations, because this will be the point that they have that gap within which they can set up shop unimpeded.
Yeah.
Sorry, John. Go on.
Yeah, one group of pests that certainly does probably merit a specific mention given the time of year are the store product insects, particularly the moths. Because if you're a factory that is processing commodities vulnerable to storage moths, we're now, April is really kick-off season for moth activity in this country. And if you're looking to, for example, to mothball a line, maybe in a biscuit factory or breakfast cereal factory, reducing the range of products, and that necessitates mothballing a line, then that line probably needs to be cleaned pretty damn thoroughly before you do that, and probably have some sort of inspection regime put in place, increased monitoring, for example, so that you pick up any problems before they get to a serious point.
And are there any differences or additional requirements around food service rather than manufacturing, for example? I think, Phil, you've mentioned around pubs and restaurant groups. Would you see any differences within Pest or the way you'd manage compared with a manufacturer?
I would say something. A lot of these sites will have been closed in relatively short order. I mean, you would have been business as usual one day, and then you would have been putting up signs the next. In my opinion, it may be worth mentally, if not physically, revisiting those sites to make sure that any of these stored foods, anything that's usually left out and made available, is actually then secured to reduce the risk that pests have access to them. Because what might be a high turnover product now is now going to be sitting for some time unattended. and those will then be readily accessible to all manner of pests. So how you store your food and how you store your products may be worth revising in order to try and safeguard them while the sites are cold.
Yeah.
Could I, if he's willing to come in, I've noticed that Phil Bentley's in the list of attendees. Yeah. Phil from Green King. Have you got anything to say on this? Because I know that you dropped me an email the other day.
Yeah, hi John. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, can do.
Yeah, so obviously we've got 3,100 sites that are all empty, and obviously the pests don't go away as we're talking about. Whilst I understand what we're talking in terms of the manufacturing sites will be manufacturing because we need to get the foods out to the supermarkets to get them out to the public, that's not the case for Green King and the other food pub operating chains. But those mice, rats, cockroaches, the whole usual spectrum won't have gone anywhere. The difference is that because of the fact that the pubs aren't trading, and that's not just Green King, that's everybody, that the staff won't be there to let people in. Weatherspoons through Whitbreads through everybody, the staff have been furloughed and there aren't people there. And under the terms of furlough, they can't be deemed to be working, as I understand it. So it's then getting access to the pest controllers to actually let them in. And as part of the lockout close down procedures, from a risk assessment point of view, talking health and safety, if the pest technicians turning up expecting to be able to use the facilities, they won't. They won't be able to wash hands or WCs because they'll all be closed down and locked down.
Somebody's a last call.
Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think I have. When we found that a lot of the sites that are, shall we say, corporate, so the larger groups of pubs and restaurants, they are allowing us on site internally as well as externally to continue pest control, that which is very encouraging. Some of the smaller sites, I suppose, are they're in a worse position, and unfortunately they are, either just saying no, we can only allow you to go outside, and there's no one around to actually allow you inside. So we are finding there's a difference there.
Can I contribute here?
Yeah.
This is Mike Ayres. We found that access to our pubs and restaurants, whilst they've all been shut down, one of the things that hasn't always happened is that all the bins in the yard areas haven't been cleaned out. And so you've got waste food left in bins, which may or may not have the bungs in them, that are going to be immediately attractive to rats. And one of the things that we're trying to do for our clients is at least get a perimeter proofing check and a perimeter environment check to make sure that, one, the environments, that all the bins are emptied and cleaned, that you haven't got waste food that's just been dumped by the last person in black bags around the back, and that if we've got boxes down there that may have, say, monitors, whether it's a trap, it won't be bait because we don't use bait outside where we can help it, but that these are all properly serviced, and that if this is going to be the last visit for a while, then we do a thorough proofing check to make sure that whilst doors aren't being used, at least the rats or mice can't climb in through other ways. Now, that, of course, doesn't help if you've got adjoining properties where you've got somebody that's busy or hasn't proofed it, but at least that's part of the service that a pest controller should be able to provide for all the shut down restaurants and pubs.
Yeah, interesting point.
Agree with that. Yeah.
Thank you, Mike. And Mike, you also had I can't even pronounce, sorry, it's not my expertise, some chemicals. Do you mind just explaining the conversation that you had through chat?
Oh, yes, this was just on permanent monitoring with rodenticides internally. The only two that are approved for use as a permanent monitor are bromadiolone and difenacune. And there are plenty of formulations out there. So this is really where non-toxic indicator blocks should be replaced with some sort of permanent toxic baiting. I'm very much with John Simmons on this one. I think it's absolutely mental to be using effectively a food to monitor for infestation, and then ignore that food for 6 weeks. So where there is non-toxic bait, it should be converted to a toxic monitor with the appropriate risk assessments. But if the site is mothballed, there's clearly no production going to be going on. And this is really going to be for food, mostly for food manufacturing sites. I wouldn't have thought non-tox was going to be used in a pub or a club, but perhaps it is. If it is, it wants to be swapped out. But there are preparations that can be used for routine monitoring and permanent monitoring inside. In terms of compliance with the codes of practice from the retailers, again, I think the priority has got to be the protection of the premises and protection of public health, which trumps all codes of practice, to be honest, because that is law. A code of practice is their preference. But I think that would require discussion with the retailers to say, we're mothballing this, this is what we're going to do, and get their agreement to do so. And I can't see any sensible technologist from a retailer saying no to that.
No, agreed.
We've had we've had another question come in, unless there's any response to Mike. Maybe I could move. So Eleanor sent a note. In food factories where flour or other bulk silos have been emptied, do you consider needed to have a fumigation before filling again? How long could an empty silo be safe without risk of pest development inside?
Wow, $64 million question, that.
That is, yeah. That was actually one of the questions.
Before you refill it.
Sorry, John.
Inspect it before you refill it.
Definitely.
If you're going to empty it, get it emptied. If you've got silo cleaners who will come in and clean it, then get them in to clean it. But the key thing is check it before you refill it, and not just the silo, but the whatever conveying system and sieving system that you've got that feeds the silo content through into the factory. It's not just the silo that could present a problem, it's the screw conveyor or the rotary sieve. Any dust collecting equipment would all need checking as well before you restart it, particularly if it's going to sit inactive for anything more than a couple of weeks.
Well, I think there where you're saying if it's inactive, if you've actually got product in it, I mean, I think this lady's actually saying that it should be emptied in the first place, which I agree. However, I have been approached before to say, how long will this flour remain okay within the flour silo? And it depends on an awful lot of criteria, including what type of flour it is, you know, and also whether you're going to get a lot of condensation or anything like that occurring within there. Otherwise, you could find yourself having to manually dig out flour rather than pumping it out.
To add a little,
sorry, no, to continue.
To add a little something, I've worked on sites with large grain silos before, and where grain is a larger, more granular material, it can clump up in corners and around the screws. And so even though when it's running and you think it's run empty, there can be a tremendous amount of material stuck around the screw threads. And I've actually found populations of rodents, especially in grain elevators, which are prone to being left off for many months, actually having populations of rodents living inside the screw augers and the grain elevators. We're going to be looking at a situation similar to that now, where a lot of this machinery will be sat fallow for a considerable period of time. And so pests will start occurring where you wouldn't usually expect them to set up shop, which I believe is what Brian was saying.
Yeah, definitely.
Can I ask a supplementary question to that? I've got clients who may be mothballing silos that are full of 40 or 50 tons of flour. Now, I've recommended that they empty them, but given the fact that many flour silos have got a low level beetle infestation, which is managed because it's regularly used, it's cleaned on a perhaps even only on an annual basis, but it is at least cleaned. Looking at the life cycle and the fecundity of, say, flower beetle being our target pest, I reckon that you'd probably want to leave a flower silo fallow for no more than 2 to 3 weeks. I wonder if anybody else has any other views on that. Is that too long? Is that long enough?
I think, bearing in mind at the time of year that we're now coming into, beetle activity, if there is a resident population within a bin, then that is going to multiply pretty damn quickly over the next
yes.
week. And I mean, there's the other side, and this is probably going a bit beyond my pay grade, but that is, if you've got the flower sitting doing nothing in a silo for multiple weeks, potentially now for multiple months, what condition is that flower going to be in? Infestation aside, at the end of that time, you might not be able to get it out of that silo without bringing in a pneumatic drill. That's the worst case scenario. So I think if you're mothballing a plant, if you're mothballing a line and it's got a dedicated silo feeding into it, you ought to be thinking very seriously about emptying it.
Yeah, I would agree. I think Brian's comment on condensation, compaction and condensation are going to be two significant factors, and possibly kill the flower before the beetles do.
Yeah, definitely.
So we've got a number of other questions to go through that have come through. Maybe just Phil. Yes, sorry.
There was a very interesting one. It's gone off my screen now, but it was from Gary Dennis.
Yes, you're right. Yeah, go through it, John. Yeah, over to you.
Yeah, can't remember the exact words now.
Let me find it. Is this an opportunity for some sites to deal with persistent issues?
Now that is a really, really interesting question for me, because certainly in the restaurant and retail business, you've got a unique opportunity at the moment. You've got shops that have had, or shops or restaurants that have had endemic problems sometimes for years, and you've now got a pretty unique opportunity to actually get on top of them. And it's an opportunity. Whether anybody out there is actually taking advantage of it, I don't know, but it is a heck of an opportunity.
Yeah, we are trying to. It's getting cooperation from the client to let us in that's sometimes the problem.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Shall we? So we have maybe go to Chris's question, Phil. If I can see you've got questions, but I think at the end of the lockdown, we anticipate an explosion of activity. The Northern Ireland pest controllers have been recognised as key workers. What are your thoughts on that as a panel?
I myself think that we should be key workers. I think we're assisting and helping people get food on the shelves. I think that's essential, and I think in these times where you're wanting food to be healthier than probably ever before, then I think you need to make sure that it isn't contaminated and is fit for health, fit for human health. I do believe that having us go into places is by far the easiest way of ensuring that it remains that way. We don't want food production runs to be shut down because of rats or mice running over belts. That's not going to help the effort for the UK at all. And I also think before we come out of this, or just as we come out of this, each and every site should have a field biologist inspection to ensure that it is fit to continue if it has been mothballed.
I would add to that as well that we need to remember that even before all of this started, these animals were considered pests for a multitude of reasons. The capacity to cause damage, to cause distress and spread disease. To look outside of the food industry just for a second to prove that public health pest control is necessary nationally. If you were to have a look, there were some studies done end of last year, where they found that flies in hospitals were actually capable of transmitting MSRA between patients, between wards. It'll also be things like that, which is why it's so fundamentally necessary for pest control to be recognised as guardians of public health, and the ability to be able to still act and work as we do, with all of this in tow as well.
Could I speak with my BPCA hat on, please?
Of course you can.
Mike, the BPCA have been lobbying the ministers and government for some weeks now, well, for at least 2 or 3 weeks, in order to get pest controllers critical worker status. Now, there is some sympathy for this, but it's not gone any further than that in terms of a recognition of pest control as key workers, except in Northern Ireland, where they are now recognised as key workers, which incidentally is also the case in France, Germany and Italy. We're somewhat behind. The British Pest Control Association has produced a template letter for its members, where its members can download that, fill in all the bits, so they can use that, because we feel, the BPCA feel, that pest controllers should be critical workers and therefore should be treated as such. This is our opinion rather than official government policy, but it hopefully will help any of the authority who perhaps might be looking and checking for reasons of travel, and it may give at least some credibility to why they're out there and what they're doing.
And there's a couple of questions or comments that come through, maybe then pass it over. Is from Lewis, pest control staff would be included as key workers if they're working within the food sector and other critical sectors. And then from Deborah, I think all those that supply goods and services that help ensure safe, hygienic food production should be classed as key workers.
Yeah.
Any other questions from anybody?
Just on that specific key worker status thing, I think the way that the government key worker definitions are worded at the moment is quite clear that pest controllers working within the food industry, working within that supply chain, are key workers. That's a given, and that shouldn't be an issue. Why the BPCA are still lobbying so hard on this is because if there is a further restriction or movement, then it could present problems to the pest control industry because of there not being specifically mentioned anywhere but Northern Ireland. So, yeah, it is a serious point, and it's certainly something I would urge the food industry, the primary trade bodies within the food industry, to do some lobbying on behalf of the pest control industry, because at the end of the day, we are quite a small industry without a loud voice. So, if BRC and Food and Drink Federation were to put out their weight behind the BPCA's argument, it will probably carry a lot more weight.
Yes, I agree.
Definitely.
And is this an opportunity just maybe to explain some of the practices that you are currently completing around physical or social distancing, and how you would approach that within a pub, restaurant, factory, retail?
Yeah. Well, certainly when we're going on site, we have to ensure that we are obviously free from all symptoms. We have to ensure that we, are making sure all our staff are aware of the symptoms, the fact that they should be self-isolating if they've got any of those symptoms whatsoever. When we do go on site, we need to explain what we're going to do. It might be that we don't even speak to I went to a site yesterday, and I actually spoke to the contact on the phone. I could see her in the next room. I had the folder in front of me, and I could ask any questions there without actually being anywhere near her. The issue, I think, comes from, as John said earlier, you can go around the outside of a building, no problem at all. It's when you get inside, and even inside, you can work your way around quite nicely. But I found that one of the issues comes when there's a break, and maybe you're just going from high risk to low risk, and there's all of a sudden there's about 16 people in the room, which to me isn't 2 meters of social distancing. So in that circumstance, I think it's probably wiser to be wearing a mask and gloves, and not particularly worrying about what other people are thinking about you, because, you know, when it comes to a break time, nothing's going to stop those people from getting out that production area.
Yeah, I mean, my comment is that, you know, because we, you know, we're not a pest control company, we're a consultancy that does essentially independent field biologist inspections. The vast majority of our inspections are accompanied. And one of the things that we're asking at the moment is, you know, it's certainly not universally agreed that it happened. One of the things we're asking at the moment is this accompanying is temporarily suspended so that our inspectors can get on and do the inspection unaccompanied. Yeah, because that reduces the risk, not just to site people, but to my people as well. And it's certainly something I would urge the food industry just to go along with for the time being.
There's a couple of other questions coming through. I think we'll probably fill the full hour, pest control, and maybe we can then, within the next session, answer some of the other areas I would suggest. It'd be nice to answer everybody's questions. That's the whole purpose of this. Maybe I could just cover Eleanor's point and then go back, and I know Phil and Gary, you've made some comments. So the one from Eleanor, regarding cockroaches infestation risk, is there any preventative measures we should do at the food manufacturing facility besides the physical barriers, residual water collectors and pipes, special treatments, increased monitoring devices in special areas, which are the highest risk areas under these circumstances? So really sort of about cockroach management. Any advice?
Cockroaches. Oh. Sorry, John.
Yeah, I mean, preventive measures. So, assuming a site doesn't have a cockroach problem, then, you know, the primary preventive measures will be making sure you don't get a problem. So that's, you know, knowing where most cockroach infestations arise within factories. In my experience, they're generally brought in by people. So it's having in place appropriate measures to reduce that risk. And, you know, bearing in mind that most people will bring them in probably first to canteens or particularly locker room areas, it will be having in place an enhanced monitoring protocol, maybe an enhanced inspection protocol of those areas. In terms of minimising risk elsewhere, again, it revolves around just upping the monitoring status. It's, you know, it's difficult to go any further than that.
Thank you, John. Question from Gary. What's the position to supplies of baits and poisons, etc., in the UK?
Well, that's one for Alex, I think.
I can't speak to all of the other manufacturers and distributors in the UK, but I can speak on behalf of Pelgar. We are still operating. We are still producing materials, and we are still sending it out to our distributors. So as far as we're concerned, we are still business as usual. And from where we are, the supply is still strong. You should still be able to get hold of the products that we produce. And I have no doubt that the other manufacturers will be taking suitable precautions in order to safeguard their own manufacturing processes. So I believe there is no risk in the very short term of rodenticidal products or insecticidal products being removed from access. You should still be able to get hold of all of it.
Thank you, Alex. Now, I'm just mindful there were a couple of other questions, maybe unrelated, but to try and cover those if we can in the call. Alex, also after that, I know that we've had a conversation around how the wider food industry, we can work together to around some of these issues. So maybe we can touch on that in a little while. But is there anything else from a pest control perspective now? Maybe we can continue this as part of the weekly discussions as other people have other questions. But anything else specifically you'd like to say now? I
have a quick question, Ian, if that's okay. Fiona, yep. It's Fiona. I'm just following on about the question around resources for pest control. What's the situation with regards to personnel? So we've seen a lot of businesses, retailers especially, recruiting large numbers of extra temporary staff. What's the situation in the pest control industry if you become short due to absences?
I can't really answer that. I mean, we're a consultancy, and as far as we're concerned, it's if customers will let us in, it's business as usual for us. And we have the same issues as everybody else in terms of a couple of people at the moment self-isolating, but beyond that, it doesn't really impact on us. It will be knowing the level of expertise that is required to carry out pest control, certainly in the food manufacturing sector, getting people in and trained up at short notice to an adequate standard, I think will be a major challenge just at the moment. I don't know if you've got anything to say on that, Brian.
I think I agree. I think it's not a quick process training someone up to be a skilled pest controller. At the moment, I think every single pest control company in the UK will be looking at the number of staff they've got available versus the number of businesses they're still able to get into. And obviously, we're going to be trying our damnedest to get out there and ensure that we are, visiting sites and making sure that everyone is as pest free as possible. And I can imagine that's the same for every single pest control company out there. We're passionate about what we do. We love the industry, and we don't want to see it go down the pan because of COVID. So,
yeah, thanks very much. And presumably the same applies when we come out the other end of this period, and a lot of businesses are opening back up again, or going back into full use or full production. Is there any planning underway in terms? We assume there'll be a peak of calls to pest control as people discover problems have occurred while places have been closed.
Well, if I might, certainly when we've mothballed sites, we've already discussed with the client about bringing the business back online, and it's agreed that we will go back in and do field biologist inspections prior to that occurring. There's so many things that could happen in between time, and we want to be sure that obviously there's no other hiccups in production of food on those sites. So we feel it's important to look at the whole site and take a snapshot at that particular time.
And for a site to get sort of a pre-opening inspection, do you think?
Definitely.
Yeah. Thank you. That's really helpful.
So, thank you, everybody. There were a couple of other questions I said earlier, so maybe we can cover on those. But what I'd suggest we do continue with having pest control on the weekly conversation. So if there are any specific issues people are getting, we've had some specific ones around treatments related to pieces of equipment. I think that's obviously very useful, and continued involvement as you see yourself as key workers. So let's keep that on the agenda, if that's okay. If I could, and thank you for your time, if I could just move to two questions. Diane had a question earlier regarding enforcement officers. So Diane, do you mind just repeating the question? You there, Diane?
Unmute. That was helpful. Yeah. That was helpful. It wasn't about enforcement actually. It was more about
police. Sorry. Yes.
The police, which I guess are enforcers. I've just heard a number of tales of employees in food manufacturing sites expressing concern about whether their health and safety is being looked after and their social distancing, and that police or enforcers have been into those businesses to check on that. Is that something that any of our members have experienced? You don't have to tell us who, but is that something that's a concern, and is that stopping people coming into work?
I might be able to give you some information, Diane, if that's helpful.
Yeah.
It's Fiona. So in terms from the retail perspective, we have had some ad hoc visits reported to us where police have come in and queried, and not so much the social distancing measures, that tends to come more from environmental health, but police have on occasion queried selling essential goods. So we've used our primary authority to support us in the interpretation of what that our premises are allowed to be open, and that we're allowed therefore to sell whatever we normally sell. In terms of social distancing, we've been trying to work proactively through the primary authorities and to really push out our social distancing measures out into the enforcement community, and have allowed our primary authority to share it with local authorities and with other businesses. So try and get a bit of openness. But we haven't seen it come as any serious challenge. I would say more ad hoc queries, but nothing serious raised. Does that help? Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. I just heard rumours of unions, for example, sort of challenging that sites are not distancing people sufficiently, and that has been sort of escalated. I take your point, Fiona, about whether foods are considered essential foods as well. I'd also heard conversations around sort of whether chocolates, confectionery, alcohol, etc., were essential or not.
Yeah, I think like you, I have heard some reports in the press mostly about unions challenging social distancing. And I mean, I think in some of, especially in the food industry, in some areas, it's going to be very, very difficult to comply. But but also very hard to enforce. You know, it's a matter of trying to make the employees and the workers on the lines feel reassured that everything is being done to support them, I presume. So it'd be interesting to see if anybody else has any experience of that sort of challenge.
Fiona Fleming, Two Sisters Food Group. We've had anecdotal feedback from colleagues travelling to sites, needed to see the letter, and that they are actually going onto a shift. So I think the advice to colleagues is walk with your shift pattern as well as the letter designating you as a key worker. And where they share vehicles, they've been challenged about the social distancing if they're not from the same family. So that's been causing a bit of concern for the sites, let's say. But I don't know what we can do about that option.
Yes, I'd heard that as well, that there've been challenges around car sharing, which a lot of facilities work to, or have minibuses transporting workers.
We've also had some challenges from the unions as well about providing masks and social distancing not being. So they've put, sites have been very inventive about how they've managed to do things. They've put strip curtains in front of operatives, and they are not working opposite each other. For example, if there's two people on either side of a line, they've staggered them. So that within the business, they're sharing all of those options and tactics that we can put in place to help them. And we're constantly looking at how it works and talking to the colleagues to see how they feel.
And have you seen, Fiona, any examples of staggered starts of shifts?
Yes, so, yeah, we're doing that.
Rather than everyone arrive at one.
Absolutely, yeah. They've changed the shift patterns where it was 6 to 2:10. They're doing half hourly, staggering in. They've got one person clocking them all in, rather than everybody doing their own clock cards. So one individual is doing the clocking in for everybody that turns up, and looking at the turnstiles, reducing the amount of handholds. At Two Sisters, we do have across the business a hold the handrail on stairs for health and safety. So that's sort of causing a bit of a issue because we're constantly having to wipe these handrails. That's putting pressure on, as we know, the scarce resources for sanitizer and cleaning and equipment. So we're kind of looking at how we can maintain that safety aspect and still do the hygienic bit that we need to implement.
So given the time we have, it's nearly the top of the hour, is this something that we could discuss on the next call in a bit more detail around social distancing within factories,
yeah,
etc.?
And yes, I think so, and share things, because we're sharing with the enforcement authorities also.
Just to quickly add something, sorry. In my reading around cleaning and disinfecting, I found an interesting piece from Public Health England, which said that any disposable objects that you're using for wiping things down or cleaning should be double bagged and then stored for 3 days. And I don't know if anyone else has heard this, but before you dispose of any cleaning implements that have been used around suspected COVID, you need to store it for at least 3 days or get it tested before throwing it away into the waste.
Hi, it's Deb from VCAN. We make that kind of equipment that's used for cleaning and disinfection and then being thrown away. What we've found is that the studies specifically on SARS-CoV-2 show that it stays active on things like plastics for 2 to 3 days. So I think that's where the guidance on the time scale comes from. However, if you're using it with a disinfectant, the disinfectant should, say a cloth for instance, the disinfectant should inactivate the virus in the same way that it does on the surface. So I don't think you need to store the cloth for that period of time. If you're using it without a disinfectant, then maybe it should go through a thermal decontamination process through washing in a washing machine. I think the temperature cited for destruction of the virus is 56 degrees C for 15 minutes. So that could be another option.
Hi, it's Peter Littleton. Completely agree with Debs there, and I've seen the same Public Health England advice about the 72-hour sort of before it's disposed of. But Deb's right. If you've used a disinfectant solution with the cloth that you're throwing away, it will continue to be active on that cloth until it degrades. So anything that was there would or should be inactivated.
Thank you, Peter. We're at the top of the hour. It sounds like there's a couple of areas for discussion next time. So we'll summarise some of the areas of today, suggest some topics for next week, reach out to some of the members or members that may be able to give share some experiences in those areas. Alex, I'm going to have to come back to your question. Well, actually, we've got 1 minute. Maybe just mention your thoughts about how you feel we could collaborate together at the end, and then we'll end the call if that's okay.
Certainly. So my thoughts were that the industries of food safety, pest control, waste and cleaning and hygiene are all very much intertwined, and for many years we've all been moving towards the same broad goal of protecting public health, but it's been a case of our paths have intersected and then we have gone back on with our own respective industries largely. And what I'd like to, this is all very much pulled us together into the same ball court, into the same arena right now. And I think there's a tremendous opportunity now, if not going forwards, to continue this conversation between the industries in order to better safeguard and to better utilise the skills that we all share in a much more productive, proactive way.
Thank you, Alex. So maybe we can talk a little bit more next week. We're at the top of the hour. Fiona, you would normally close out. Are you able to close out in a short time? Thanks.
Yes, I'll be very quick. Thanks very much to Ian for very expertly chairing that, and I think that worked really well. Thanks again to John, Brian and Alex for all of their wise words and advice to us. And I think watch this space. We'll start communicating very soon about next week's Soft Focus Live. I think we've got some topics there. The one around disposing waste, working across the industry, as Alex said, really do sound like the hot topics for the next one. So just want to thank everybody for joining, and please stay safe, and hope to speak to you again next week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.